Hello and welcome to Student Affairs Live. I'm your host, Tony Doody, and I'm pleased to be joining you from my professional home at Rutgers University. We broadcast on the Higher Ed Live network, and you can tune in to Student Affairs Live along with my brilliant friend and co-host, Heather Shea Gasser, this fall, Wednesdays at 1 o'clock Eastern Time. If you are unfamiliar with past episodes, I highly recommend you check out and favorite the archive link that we're sending out now. We're proud to cover important topics with the help of some top practitioners, scholars, and experts in the field, as evidenced by our fantastic group that we have with us today. And be sure to stay with us till the end of the show to hear about the great lineup we have scheduled for December. In a moment, I'll introduce you to our distinguished guests, but we can't do that without giving a shout out to the sponsors that make Student Affairs Live possible. Higher Ed Live is sponsored and produced by M. Stoner, a marketing and communications firm that works with education institutions on branding, strategy, web design, and more. Student Affairs Live is also sponsored by ACPA, College Student Educators International. ACPA's strategic partnership with Higher Ed Live calls attention to the pairing of innovative professional development delivery with the strength of a renowned professional association. ACPA publishes the Journal of College Student Development and About Campus. I would also like to extend a big warm thanks to Terry Bump for all her support and guidance in helping develop today's show. For those who may not know her, she is a student affairs rock star and a friend and source of inspiration for many professionals around the world, and I'm sure some of the guests on today's show as well. I also want to take a moment to thank Kate Zullo and Kerry Locke, who are tag teaming the monitoring of today's back channel and sending me your best comments and questions from the Twitterverse. I want to remind everyone that these episodes are really designed to be interactive, and your engagement, your questions, your comments on Twitter really improves the quality of the live dialogue. So if you appreciate something that you hear today, perhaps some nuggets of wisdom that you can craft into 140 characters or less, please share it out with others so we can extend the learning to everyone. Don't be shy, tweet away. Now, we put together a phenomenal lineup, and you see them out here before you right now. Their full biographies can be found on the Higher Ed Live website. So I'd like to start off by having you introduce yourself. We'll go from left to right on my screen, at least, starting with Barbara, and have you each briefly describe your current role and either an interesting story or an interesting lesson that you learned from a recent search process. Barbara?
Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Barbara LoMonaco, and I'm Vice President for Student Affairs at Salve, Regina University in Newport, Rhode Island. I am in my 4th month at Salve, Regina, and just came out of a search that Spelman and Johnson conducted as the lucky candidate. And I guess what really interested me about the whole process as a candidate, and been on the other end of many searches, is that search firms are really interested in getting the right fit for institutions. And so they spend a lot of time asking you hard questions about how your skills might translate. And that, in turn, really gives you the language to articulate how your skills translate when you talk with the search committee. So that was really an interesting part of the process, and I have to say, incredibly useful.
Fantastic. Dusty?
I'm Dr. Dusty Porter, the Vice President of Student Affairs at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I've been at Tulane for about 16 months. I arrived a year ago summer. And I think one thing that I would comment on is I recently had the chance to conduct 2 searches this past summer for 2 assistant vice presidents of student affairs, one in campus life and one in housing and recreation. And one thing I really learned when I conducted those searches is the importance of really being able to network to get the right candidates to apply. That what I learned is that one of the individuals that we eventually chose was all about the fact that someone else on my team had met her at a professional event this summer and talked with her about the opportunity and really kind of persuaded her to think about throwing her hat in, and how when you go to conduct these searches, it's so important to think about all the different touch points you and your team have across the country to get the best folks to apply, and the importance of those relationships.
Excellent. Ellen?
Hi, I'm Ellen Heffernan from Spelman Johnson, and I have lots of stories about things that go well or don't go well in searches, but I had to sort of condense them down into 3 bullets. And I thought things that people do well is sensing opportunities and really honing in the interview process, and things they don't do well is missing opportunities, not reading the group well. I've got lots of stories around those kinds of things, and getting off track. There's a lot of people give a lot of help in the search process, more help than you would think, and people don't always grab it and pay attention to it and listen to good advice when they hear it.
Great. Felicia?
Good afternoon. I'm Felicia McGinty. I'm Vice Chancellor for Student Affairs at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. And I've been in my role, I'm just starting my 3rd year. And so and this is my 2nd Senior Student Affairs Officer position. So I've been involved in lots of searches, and one of the things that I learned through the most recent process is the value of really getting to know the person who is coordinating the search. So the value of being able to form a relationship with the consultant who's managing the search, and understand that they really work for the institution that they're hired to place a person, but that if they really understand you and your story and the nuances there, that really is invaluable to you as a candidate.
Fantastic. So, Ellen, let's assume I'm a department or a division at a university, and we're looking to initiate a search using a professional firm such as your own. Can you talk broadly about the role and responsibility that a search firm has, and kind of walk us through a typical good search process?
So search firms in general partner with an institution. So part of the trick of it is understanding what the culture is for that institution to do a search as well when you partner with them. We work very closely with search committees and with the hiring authority. We will come on campus and spend time with stakeholders to get feedback about challenges and opportunities, what's the culture like, who's going to be successful here, all of those different pieces. We write a series of documents both for candidates and for the campus to talk about, here's what we heard, here's what you're thinking about, here's what you told us you really wanted and needed. From there, we recruit people. We call people, we email people, we have conversations with people. I think Dusty had a great point about people's own professional networks. It's the same thing with us. We have professional networks. We're at all sorts of different events all the time, talking with people, meeting with people, looking at people for potential positions, all of those different things. We build a pool, we vet the pool, we present it with the search committee. The search committee will have decided up front how they want to manage that. Do they want to do phone interviews? Do they want to do Skype interviews? Do they want to do airport interviews? From there, we then work with them on more vetting as they move people through the process. And at the end, we work with the hiring authority to basically make the bridge to get the offer made and accepted. So we basically manage the search in a way that allows the search committee to focus on the candidates and the fit, because the fit at the end of the day is really important. You can have a pool of people who can do the job. It's who can do the job and be successful at your institution at that moment in time. That's really what we're looking at.
Great, and we'll get to the institutional fit question a little bit later on. Dusty, I want to focus in on a candidate's perspective. Can you talk about what you might consider to be due diligence or best practice process that candidates should engage in before they participate in the search?
Sure. So I'm going to speak to the Chief Student Affairs Officer search, and then I think that will be applicable for other types of roles. But if I really think about an individual that is pursuing an opportunity to be a Vice President of Student Affairs at an institution, these are the types of diligence that I would consider to be important. The first is, depending on what the reporting line, either the president or the provost, I would make sure I'm finding out who's in that role, how long they've been in that role, and some of their priorities as described in any kind of information that might be available on the web or through other types of publications. I would make sure I'm taking a look at the cabinet and getting a sense as to sort of how the cabinet is organized, and also the sense of how long those individuals have been in the cabinet. You know, sometimes when you're coming into a Chief Student Affairs Officer opportunity and you know you're going to be around people that have been there for a very long time, that's going to be a different dynamic than maybe individuals that have only been on the cabinet for a year or two that might be thinking a little bit about, well, when I came a year ago, you know, I've learned some things, so I'm going to help you, you know, if you came to interview, think about what that might be like versus folks that have been there for 15 to 20 years, which you often find at smaller institutions where you have long-serving individuals. I think it might be helpful sometimes to use sites such as LinkedIn and try to determine, is there someone that I know within a circle or a second circle that's at that institution who I might have a quiet conversation with about what's happening right now at the institution. What are some topics or themes that are playing out within the division or within the campus operating environment that might emerge while I'm there on campus in terms of a question I might get from a search committee. Along those same lines, we don't see a lot of student publications anymore in terms of hard copy, but we see lots of campus papers that are web-based, and so I'd be reading the most, you know, couple of weeks or months of the papers to see, again, what's kind of playing out. I'll often, if I've been in a search, I'll try to see if there's a copy of a strategic plan that exists for the institution and see what's important around their own plan over the next 5 to 10 years. And then finally, I think a candidate should look at the IPEDS data that's available online and see what retention's looking like and persistence. I think it's when you're in a search and you can say, oh, I did notice that you're doing pretty well with male students, but maybe female students are more challenged or other types of groups. It speaks to the fact that you've prepared as a candidate. So those are probably some of the pieces that I think are important in addition to the kind of position profile that you're going to get, is to do a little bit more digging. I don't think you need to go overboard, but I think you need to know enough as you walk into that process to be prepared for the kinds of questions you might get.
So Felicia referred back before and identified that the search firm is really working for the university. What are some of the other common, and Ellen, you can start us off with this, what are some common mistakes or assumptions that candidates might make when working with a search firm?
I think they forget that we work for the institution. So what they tell us becomes part of the whole entire sort of portfolio that they have. But on the flip side of that, if you have something that's problematic or that's questionable or that's an odd move or something that you need to explain in your background, we can also advocate for you. So if you bring that to us up front and start to talk about it and walk us through it, we can be better advocates for you, explaining that with the search committee. And we've all sat on search committees and we know what happens. If it's not clear to the search committee, they can make things up. They'll decide, they'll try to figure out, well, why is this person moving from a hot place to a cold place, from where it snows to, you know, that kind of thing. They'll try to sift through that, and they'll try to speak to motivations that have no basis because they don't have the person in front of them. So working with the search consultant, we can help in that way if we understand what some of your questions are, some of the things that you've done in your job search.
And Barbara, you're working right now at a Catholic private institution. So from a candidate's perspective, can you speak to the differences in school type and how you can best determine institutional culture and fit?
Yeah, I think that on both sides of the table, both as a recent candidate and in conducting searches, the issue of fit isn't so much, you know, can someone coming from a large school really succeed at a small school? It's about how the candidate translates the experiences that they've had to your context. And part of this is, you know, as Dusty just said, doing your due diligence and really understanding, especially at a small school, what are the main challenges, what are the concerns? You might be talking about Division I athletics issues that have nothing to do with Division III, and that can sometimes be a deal breaker. So I think that the issue of fit has to do with adequately articulating how your experiences, even if they seem quite different on the face of it, actually translate rather well. I think that the other issue with fit, too, is once you're a candidate on campus, asking the right questions to determine what the organizational culture is. So how is decision-making made? Who are really the key stakeholders? Some of the issues that Dusty mentioned about cabinet, I think, are very important at senior level positions. How are the cabinet working together as a team or maybe not working together as a team? So I don't worry so much about issues of scale as it is a candidate's ability to genuinely translate those prior experiences, even if at a very different kind of institution.
And Felicia, I was fortunate to serve on the search committee for your position, and I vividly recall this panel-like interview format. In your particular case, there were 24 people in this horseshoe seating arrangements. People are smiling. You must recognize this, right?
It sounds awful.
I felt awful. It was focusing on a single chair in the middle of the room, out and exposed. Can you talk about the challenges of that format and some strategies folks might use in a large group interview format?
Sure. That was certainly challenging, and I can say it felt a little bit like interviewing with a small city. So there are a number of dynamics, and I think one, if you're looking for a senior student affairs officer position, you need to be prepared to be flexible and roll with the punches and just demonstrate your ability to work a crowd despite the circumstance. In that particular case, I had no idea that was the setup. And so women have to think about a number of things. Candidates always should be concerned about their wardrobe and how they present and whether or not they look professional. But in this case, I was wearing a shirt, and had I known, I would have worn pants. But I'm sitting in this kind of conference view, and everybody's focused on me, and I'm trying to be on the edge of my seat. So it was challenging. But I'd say in that situation, you just need to demonstrate that you're flexible. You need to work the crowd. It's important to try to maintain eye contact, and so you've got to be mindful about looking all around the room. And trying to draw people into a conversation and read their body language, which is challenging because they're behind tables and they're able to see all of your body language because there's no barrier there. So I had to be very mindful of my language, my body language, and to really try to connect with a crowd, which is challenging when there are that number of people and there are multiple stakeholders. So being intentional in your responses to try and choose something that's going to connect with a particular stakeholder group and make some eye contact with them while you're delivering that response is helpful. And I just say, more than anything, it's your ability to remain poised, even under those difficult circumstances. That's what wins out in the end.
So this question's for anyone. Is there an ideal size for a search committee? And in addition to that, should the search committee be within the department or the division, or should it be more broad, more inclusive, bring people in from outside your department?
From my perspective, I think it depends on the position. But in general, I think anytime you get more than 12 people in a room, it becomes unwieldy. So I would err on the side of 12 or less, and to really try to cover the different stakeholders. So it would be important to have student representation, to have representation of key partners on the campus and key partners in the division. There's no right or wrong formula, and sometimes things get political because folks are really interested in the position, so everybody wants a seat at the table. But I'm a fan of a smaller, more manageable committee, but having a more robust campus visit so that candidate has an opportunity to visit with the stakeholders more individually to have those focused conversations. But that's just my take on things.
No. And I'll just speak on a small campus. I do think that having people from outside your department is important. And being able to have representation from enrollment and from the business office and, of course, student representation, all of those various constituencies. And as Felicia pointed out, it is difficult because everybody does want a place at the table when it's a search that the campus is quite invested in. And I think you can achieve that through small group meetings during the campus visit, exactly as she said.
Ellen, I asked Dusty earlier about preparing and due diligence for candidates. How can a school best position itself to attract the best professionals from across the industry?
I think there's a lot of different aspects to that, and one is, human resources folks are pulled from pillar to post, and recruiting is just one piece of what they have to do. So I think it falls to the division, and if we use student affairs as a marker for that, to really, as Dusty said, if you're a student affairs division that's never been to NASPA or never been to ACPA or doesn't go to a COI, and no one knows about you, it's harder to recruit because nobody knows about you. So it's incumbent, the professional development fits recruitment in so many different aspects, both it helps folks who are doing professional development, but it gets you out there talking about what's happening at your institution. And it's the same way with social media. When somebody's looking, when you've posted a job, Director of Student Activities, candidates are going to look at your social media from your division. What are you talking about? What are your students talking about? What kind of things are happening? It's this idea now that it's a different, more transparent way to recruit, because some of it is done, you have to do every single day is recruitment. Every single thing you're talking about, what your students are talking about, what you're working on, what's happening at your institution. There's some institutions right now that are going to be very difficult to recruit for because of things that are happening on their campuses. So that's a piece of it, is when candidates look at positions, they're looking at the institution, the position, and who they're going to report to. Those are the three biggest pieces that you're marketing as an institution for a job.
Great. So you brought up social media, and I'm going to jump ahead to a question we had slated later. And I'm going to cite this 2015 study by the company Weber Shandwick that found that 80%, 4 out of 5 chief executive officers from the world's top companies are now engaged online via social media. According to the research, the number of CEOs on social sites has more than doubled since 2010. What are your recommendations about about having a presence on social media, particularly for senior roles in student affairs?
I can put my 2 cents in on that one. If you have on your resume that you are closely connected to students and understand the student experience, and I can find nothing about you online, I'm kind of not going to buy that.
Wow, that's a good point.
Because that's where our students are, and so that's where you need to be. And honestly, if your president is tweeting and you're not tweeting, I would think that would be a little bit of an issue.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah.
Anyone
I would
else?
agree also, just coming from the last Region 1 NASPA conference, there was a lot of Twitter discussion just about recent happenings around racial injustices on campus around the nation. And it's great to be able to sit in a session with Kevin Kruger, and he's tweeting about the same panel that you're tweeting about. And so I think that not only for reaching out to students about things that are happening on campus or things that you just want to share with them to make you more human, you can also engage in some of those national discussions in an abbreviated way through social media with your colleagues.
Yeah, I would also add that I think that there's a great value in social media, and in full disclosure, Tony Doody had to help me to see the light on Twitter. But it's been wonderful, and I so appreciate him for nudging me, because that's the way that our students connect.
Right.
And as recently as I believe last week, our students wrote an opinion piece in our daily newspaper about the lack of administrators connecting with students, and they cited me as the only person in senior administration that's on social media. I thought, oh, that's hilarious. But, that's what they want. And so recently I've had both the president and the chancellor asking me about social media. So we need to, if we're going to be authentic about our work, we need to go where the students are. And they're on social media. So I'm late to the game, but I'm in the game now, and it makes a difference.
Now, Ellen, you mentioned before LinkedIn, or actually maybe Dusty, you mentioned using LinkedIn to find networks of folks. Is it, Ellen, from your perspective, from a search firm, is it a useful platform? Is it something that you use to help develop your networks?
Not quite the way you would think we would use it. And higher ed has been interesting. The career services folks were on LinkedIn early. They were really early adopters of LinkedIn. I think what candidates need to remember is if your LinkedIn information isn't matching your resume information, there's a bit of a problem. And that's where we look for more things, that you have a social media presence, that you are on LinkedIn, things that may show up on LinkedIn that don't show up on your resume or vice versa. That's more how we think about it. I think in the aggregate, search firms globally look at LinkedIn for particularly for very specific positions. If you need a scientist who speaks Chinese to study something in agriculture, for example, that's a lot of search firms talk about that's a real help for LinkedIn. You can find very specific, when your N is really small, you can find very specific kind of folks with certain backgrounds on LinkedIn.
But Dusty, when someone's applying for a position, how can you assess the risk of being in a search where at some point everyone will know that you're actually in a search?
I think that's a great question. I think from the candidate perspective, you kind of have to tell yourself as you move forward that if everyone's going to know, then who do I want to make sure that I'm speaking with?
Right.
So, for example, I think it's important that you probably make a good decision about whether you want your boss to know so she or he doesn't hear about it from someone else.
Right.
I kind of begin with that individual. Often, I think if that person's in your court, you can be honest with them about why you're looking or why you find that position attractive. And I think more often than not, they're going to appreciate the fact that you're being honest with them as part of having that conversation. I think the other key piece that I have found is that you really want to be thoughtful about, those who work with you or around you, because often than not, if everyone's going to know, they're going to be talking about it. So being able to have a conversation with maybe a confidant or someone that you really trust to be able to let them know, so when the rumors start, there's an individual that's able to have kind of those conversations with others in ways that you're not having to do that, but they might be able to sort of reflect, here's why that person's applied, for that role, or kind of why they're looking. I think that the premise of if they're looking, that must mean they're going to leave, is something that we need to also mitigate, because there's going to be one candidate that may or may not be that person. And so I think thinking because they're looking at means that they're disengaged or don't want to be here anymore is not necessarily true. There may be something about that search that's really appealing to them. And then finally, for the candidate, I think what's also important is if you're going to move forward in a search, particularly when you get to that finalist round, you need to be able to live in two worlds. One is the world in which you get the job, and one is the world in which you don't get the job. And being prepared to live in those two worlds, you need to be prepared for, because if you don't get the job, you don't want to be walking around and feeling like now I'm mopey or people are looking at me funny. And so you got to be prepared for those two scenarios, even if it's going to mean some cognitive dissonance.
Yeah. And I would add also that confidentiality for members of the search committee in any national search that you're conducting is so important, and we really do try to keep things as confidential as possible until a campus visit, and then we communicate very clearly to candidates, look, once you're on campus, it'll be on social media or it will be published on our webpage that you're here, but we really try to avoid having search committee members saying, oh, let me call my friend at that university and see about that candidate, because that does compromise any confidentiality we do try to maintain.
But recognize that people do it, even though they're not supposed to. So.
Yeah, that's right.
So based on your involvement as candidates or as members of the search process, Ellen, you said you had quite a few stories that you condensed. So here's an opportunity to share some other ones. What are some red flags that all of you have observed that signal a potential issue or concern either with a candidate or if you're interviewing with the institution?
I have a few I could start off with. One piece of advice that I would really offer is when you're a candidate, you want to treat everybody well, from the student that's giving the tour to the person that's picking you up for breakfast to the last person you see at the end of the day. Because often I think people I've seen candidates go on a tour and say something kind of either really odd or kind of be perceived by the student as not, I don't know, treating them with the same level. And that student comes right back and says, I had the weirdest thing happen when I was on that tour with that candidate. And so I think it's so important that when you're a candidate, you're really treating everybody with the same level of respect and the sense of I'm the candidate and I'm trying to make a good impression from the beginning of the day to the end of the day, even when you're tired. I think that's just incredibly important. My other piece of thing I would say is don't be a know-it-all. You're on a campus for one day, and you may be picking up some perspectives or themes. But what you want to might be able to say is, I've heard some themes today that I think I might offer some value on, but don't assume that you know what's going on. You've only been there 24 hours. And so I think it's important to not assume that you need to have all the answers after only being there for a short amount of time.
Yeah, but I think, Dusty, it's also a balancing act, because I want a candidate who has a point of view. And so if they're sort of agreeing to everything, and when they're pressed on, what might your vision be if you come here? And I realize this is tough for a candidate to commit to a point of view when they don't know the institution inside and out. So that's a balancing act, right?
I agree, and I think some of the language that I've seen candidates use or I've used have been to say, well, one idea that I might suggest, or one possibility could be, as opposed to, well, what you need to do is X.
Exactly.
As soon as you say what you need to do is X, someone in that room is at the table thinking, why do they think that? They have no idea that that's never going to work here.
Yep, I agree. I also think that you need to have conversations with your supervisor and the folks on your campus once you are going to go forward in a process, because it will get back. So it's better that you're upfront and you talk to your supervisor or your direct reports as appropriate, just to give them insight on what's going on. Because I think if to Dusty's point earlier, if people think that you're looking and start to make assumptions about you not being fully invested in your current position, you want to handle that well, because you may not go anywhere. And so you still need to keep things right on the home front.
And I would say, I would take us on a slightly more tactical direction and say campuses spend a lot of time trying to design what this day is going to look like for a candidate, or on questions for a Skype interview or a phone interview and things like that. And particularly lately I've been really talking to candidates about the issue of time management. If you've got 30 minutes and 6 questions, you need to do the math. Because search committees want to get through all their questions. There's a reason they've planned it that way, and they want you to have time to ask questions. And they lately, my search committees have been getting, rightly so, very agitated when it's 30 minutes on the first 2 questions. So those are the kinds of things you need to think about as a candidate. What is the committee trying to achieve here? What is the campus trying to achieve? And how do I keep myself in that role and on time and meeting the needs of everybody who's spending 1 hour with me?
And I want to say it's really helpful when a committee will tell you from the beginning of the interview, listen, we have a series of 10 questions or 6 questions. We have 30 minutes, so we're going to move through that and want to give you an opportunity. When they've given you that, that's like a syllabi. It's your instruction. So get on their program and go with it. There are times where you may feel like I really need to linger here and make a point, but it needs to. I think being succinct and thorough at the same time, it's a challenge, but if you've got to do it. It's kind of like speed dating, particularly in those initial telephone interviews.
Yeah, I agree. And it is a big red flag if a candidate takes 15 minutes to answer the first question, that's a buzzkill.
Yeah.
Now, Felicia, I believe you've been on at least one presentation on the topic of sponsorships. I saw you present with Terry Bump at a NASPA regional conference. Can you explain the difference between a mentor and a sponsor and what their role might be during an executive search process?
Sure. I would say, in a nutshell, a mentor is a person that I seek out for advice, encouragement. That person may know, the fuller spectrum of my life, my personal life and my professional life, etc. A sponsor is a person who I have a very good professional relationship with. It's usually a person who has a busy job and not a lot of time. Their time is limited and they want to help me, but they ask me hard questions. What do I want? Where do I want to go? Why do I think I want those things? And then they strategize with me on how to get there. So a sponsor is going to pick up a phone and make a call on your behalf to endorse your candidacy, not just serve as a reference. They may be the person who nominates you. They're typically people who have, in my professional life, they're people who have greater positional authority and power. So college presidents, I have a couple of them that are sponsors for me. They will do those things. They'll pick up the phone, they'll make a call, and because of their experience and positional authority, when they speak, folks are more inclined to listen, but they're also not people that I'm going to talk to about my work-life balance issues. They don't care. They want to know, what are my career goals? What do I want to do? How can I benefit that organization and help me position myself to get there? So it's a different kind of relationship, and I think both roles are very important, but folks need to know the difference and understanding, what you're asking for.
So, Barbara, I'm going to direct this one at you. If a new or mid-level professional is watching the show and they aspire to an executive position somewhere in the future down the road, what should they be doing earlier in their career rather than later to set them up for success down the road?
Yeah. I'm really a big believer in professional development. And I think that I would really love to see a young professional who has taken the time to present their work at conferences, not just attend a conference, but to present best practices from their institution. Getting involved beyond their campus in leadership roles, I think, is important. And then on campus, I think that getting involved in campus-wide initiatives, serving on committees that are campus-wide, so that you're not just wearing the Student Affairs jersey, but that you have perspectives that give you a broader institutional view is important. I found really that one of the NASPA Institute for New Senior Student Affairs Officers was invaluable for finding people who were great mentors to me, who were able to talk with me once I decided to search for a new position, and really gave me just invaluable feedback and helped me think through a lot of those questions. So for mid-level professionals, I think networking is indispensable. And at conferences, really go to sessions that are where the presenters are at institutions where you think you might like to be, so you can really get a read on that organizational culture and understand what's happening on other campuses and what might appeal to you on those campuses.
And I would add things like, you should be able to talk about your enrollment on your campus, your enrollment goals for your campus, your fundraising, who your donors are, who's on your board of trustees, what's happening in your athletics area. Even as a new or mid-level professional, all the way up the spectrum, you should understand fundamentally the aggregate what's happening at your institution. And then as you move up the ladder, I will also say you need to be able to talk about what's happening nationally. Because when people, if you're applying for a VP for Student Affairs or an AVP, and you can't talk about what's happening in Title IX, you can't talk about different, really key things, value of the degree, what does liberal arts mean, how are we graduating students, when are they finding jobs, all of the things that we're talking about nationally, that's going to be a problem for you at a senior level as well.
Yeah. I agree. And that issue of homework that we've discussed, I mean, I expect, even for almost entry-level professionals, that they would have looked at a campus master plan or a strategic plan to get some idea of the larger questions that we're committed to as an institution. There's really no time that's too early to start to do that kind of careful homework to understand the landscape that you'd be stepping into.
Dusty, Felicia, you have any advice for the younger you?
Well, I think, one piece that's very important, I believe, is to take advantage of any kind of cross-functional committee within the division or at the university, and ask your supervisor, for the ability to participate in those kinds of task forces or committees that are outside your functional area. If it's not happening, you need to ask, how can I make sure that happens? A second piece that I would add is that, ask and invite the Chief Student Affairs Officer for lunch and say, I'm a new professional, or I'm a mid-level professional. Here are some things I'm learning. Do you have any advice for me? Are there some things I could be doing? Do you see some opportunities that maybe you and I might talk about to help me leverage my time at this institution to continue to make, get the kind of well-rounded experience that's going to position me for whatever may come next in my life? Most people will say, wow, that is a great question. Let's talk about, what you care about and what you're interested in. I would agree that getting involved in a specific area, ACPA, NASPA, some of the other professional groups, is pretty important. But I would also say, don't get involved with everything. Like, pick one or two that you really care about. Sometimes I get worried when I see a resume of someone that's doing so much professionally. I really wonder about how much are they going to be caring about the job I'm hiring them to do. They kind of seem like they're more interested in being on the road. And so I think you want to be thoughtful around where they're putting that energy, and it's better to kind of focus on one or two things you really care about, because then that shows a commitment as part of sort of who you are.
Right.
Yeah, I would just add, I agree with everything that's been said, and I would add, for new and mid-level professionals, go ahead and finish your advanced degree so you can get that out of the way. I think the other thing that you should do is, one of the ways you can distinguish yourself is by being a person who is, so even if you're seeing a problem within your division and it's not really in your department or your unit and it's not yours to solve, but you see a problem and you're thinking, wow, I bet there's a better way to do this and I have an idea. Coming out there with those ideas and suggestions, not necessarily from a place of being critical and saying you're broken, but saying, I've noticed a problem and I have a solution, and posing it. That's another way to be noticed. And then I think finally the other thing is, it is important to start to develop, while I think the best student affairs folks are generalists and they've got broad experience across the board, I also think that there's value in developing an area of expertise. So developing a specialization. So if it's social media, we need people who do that. If it's marketing, we need people who do that. So it doesn't necessarily have to be the traditional, I'm a housing officer and I'm in this box. Even within my area as being a specialist in housing, I also have these other areas of competencies that are value added for a division or a university, and I'm bringing that to the table. That's another way to distinguish yourself.
Good point.
So, somewhat related, we got a question from Sarah Ackerson from Twitter, and she wants to know how you suggest getting supervisory experience when there isn't an opportunity on the campus to get it and they're place-bound. Anyone have an idea?
I get this question a lot. I guess part of it is this person, are you supervising students? And I think what we have to understand is the greater idea of supervision. So students are not easy to supervise, right? They show up in the snow in flip-flops and, all sorts of things like that. So you have to talk about how you supervise students and some of the things you have to do with in terms of performance and evaluation and those kinds of things. You may also be able to talk a little bit about not so much supervision, but bring it over to like committee work, where you've got a piece of a committee or you're trying to move a project forward. You don't have responsibility for these people; they're not direct reports, but you've got to supervise them to get something moving forward. And placebound is, it's almost like placebound is the second part of that question, which is placebound means geographically doesn't have a place to move, but there's other things to think about in higher education besides the current institution you have. There's other kinds of institutions, there's other things to think about there, but that the ability to talk about understanding the fundamentals of supervision as well, it will help if you don't have a lot of direct supervision.
I think it's really interesting because all of us at the Chief Student Affairs Officer level remember our first jobs where we weren't supervising, right? And it's the catch-22 of, well, you haven't supervised, but eventually someone's going to have to hire you for a job in which you're supervising. And so I think some of the things that individuals can do, in addition to what Ellen had noted, is to be able to say, well, I've gone through a strengths quest, or I know kind of my styles, and here's our areas where I'm strong, and here's areas that I really want to focus on, or I've been part of a student employment initiative at the college, so I've been working on how we can make sure work-study students are gaining professional development skills. So I think there's some things people can be ready for when they get that question that can recognize, well, although I may not have supervised, here are some of the strategies I've been using to really think about myself when I move into that role where I will be supervising.
I couldn't agree more, and I think that if you can demonstrate that you have helped those students you supervise or work with develop their leadership capacity, I mean, that's what all of us are doing at senior level positions, is developing the capacity in others. And I think there are other ways to demonstrate that rather than supervising staff.
So I would add to that, managing projects, so leading a project and overseeing that's very important. If you can manage projects, you can manage people. So I think that's good. I think advising student organizations is in some ways a form of supervision. So there are things that the person who tweeted is probably doing on a daily basis that while they're not listed as supervision on her resume, they're similar skill building responsibilities. So I think it's really in how you market that and demonstrating a willingness to take on things, even if it's saying, I'll manage the student volunteers for this event, I'll manage the students in the office. Start somewhere and then be open to building. But if we will trust you to manage a project and you do a good job with that, that's telling me that you would probably do a good job managing people as well.
So let's say that you have successfully negotiated, and you've been given the job offer. What tips do you all have on how to negotiate salary, benefits, other employment conditions? You don't want to reveal your secrets?
Well, I'll give the umbrella for this one. The ability to negotiate or what you have to negotiate really depends on whether you're new, mid-level, senior, or executive. Obviously, there's a lot more you can negotiate at the presidential level or the VP level than you can negotiate as a student activities coordinator, for example. So I think negotiation as a terminology is a little bit broad when sometimes there's not a lot for you to negotiate. I will say, regardless of whether there's a lot for you to negotiate, you do have to do your homework. You have to check cost of living, you have to do salary comparisons, you have to look at all of those things, taxes that are owed, because you have to make a decision. And you also have to look at benefits. There's lots of times we send out the benefits information to candidates and they don't really look at it. If you've got a really rich benefit package where you are, and you're going to end up paying a lot more for a similar health insurance plan, for example, then you have to figure that out in terms of your salary. So those are some of the things to just broadly think about when you're going to think about negotiation.
I often say for a candidate that's moving into being a finalist, if you haven't talked about salary at that point before you become a finalist, it's good to know the range. You should not be interviewing for a job that you're going to be shocked when you get the offer. You should at least know what the range is in terms of what you might be able to expect, because nobody wants to be a finalist and then say, if I'd known that, I wouldn't have come to the campus, because that's a waste of everybody's time. And so if the institution's not being upfront at the stage where they're bringing you on at least about a range, and that kind of helps to not have to negotiate back and forth. The only other piece of advice I would offer, if you're a candidate and you get an offer and you feel like you want to go back and have a counter offer, do it once and that's it. And so if you're going to come back and say, here's what I'm really looking at, or here's what's important to me, don't go back and forth. Like, say this is, you might be prepared, you might be flexible if they come back and go, we can't give you 5,000, but we'll give you 2. But don't go back and treat it like you're buying a house. Like, just once you say once, because that's going to sour kind of the whole relationship before you even get there. So that would be my other piece of advice.
Yeah. And I think that also for mid-level professionals, there are other things to negotiate other than salary. So what kind of funding is available for professional development? What are the expectations about how close to campus you need to live? What are the kinds of raises that are awarded? At the senior level, I really think you have to look at the 990s so that you can see where the cabinets stand in the range of salaries. And if you're working with a search firm, and I had this experience, they will be upfront about the salary range, and they'll ask you questions about cost of living. If you're going from a place that's more rural or a lot cheaper to live, they'll say, is this going to be an issue for you? And I think you really have to know what your bottom line is. If it's an amazing fit and a place you really want to be, know what your bottom line is and what you can really live with if negotiations don't work out and you can't get a higher salary.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I would say if you're going for a Chief Student Affairs Officer position, and really any position, and throughout the search process, the name of the game is doing your homework. So you've got to do your homework. If you don't do your homework well, you won't get an offer anyway. But even in that negotiation phase, do your homework. See if you can find out what your colleagues are making. So that you know where you sit. If somebody offers me a number, my next question is, where does that position me in relation to my colleagues? Because I want to get a sense of, am I getting the lowball thing that you give the outsider, or are you valuing me as a member of the team and I'm on par with my colleagues? I would also say, ask questions, as Barb stated earlier. Sometimes it's really not about the money, it's about other things that are just as important. Maybe about autonomy, about your portfolio, about reporting lines. Those things may be worth negotiating that don't change your bottom line in the salary. But again, at the senior level, you want to be looking at, what all the other tangibles are, car allowances, housing allowances, who's eligible for those things, who's bonus eligible. This is language that we don't tend to speak in higher ed, and particularly in student affairs. But if you look, depending on your institution, there are other members of cabinet who are bonus eligible, and student affairs folks may not typically be. But those are good questions to ask, because if you don't get what you want going in, then you're probably just going to be disappointed, because you won't catch up to, if it's really far off, then you'll always lag. So trying to make a compelling offer when you're negotiating, and I agree with Dusty, it's not about trying to get everything in the kitchen sink, but I would say that if you don't ask, then you won't have. So if you're at a D1 school and football tickets are important and expensive, negotiate the football tickets or the basketball tickets. I mean, there are all kinds of things that you may be able to kind of weave in, into that initial ask. So look at all those things. If your partner, spouse, whatever, and those things are important, those are going to be conversations you have to have as well.
One thing I learned in my recent position for the first time, even though this is my second role as a Chief Student Affairs Officer, was being asked to sign a contract. And that's not anything that I'd ever been asked to do before, so that was a new piece for me. So I think being prepared to have an attorney or have the right person review that with you is going to be important too. Just like what they always tell you in life, don't sign anything you haven't looked at. And so, and actually, as part of my sort of process, something came out of the contract that was in there based on some advice. So I think you want to be thoughtful if you're asked to sign something, that you're giving the kind of a fidelity to reviewing that with the subject matter expert as part of that process.
Yeah. It's well worth the money to have an attorney review your contract at the senior level. Well worth it.
Yep.
So we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to get to this question before I get to the last question, which is resources. So let's say you've landed the job. What are some of your recommendations for the onboarding process? What should you be doing in the weeks prior to your start date, and then what should you be doing in the first few weeks after you start to best prepare you for the transition?
I can start. One strategy I used, because at my current institution there had been an interim who was going to be departing before I arrived, was to make sure I was having a couple of conference calls with him to really get his perspectives on what was awaiting for me when I arrived in terms of things that would be urgent and burning that I would need to know about. And then I also asked each of my direct reports to prepare about a 4-page document that gave me an overview of what they thought were some of the issues that were at play that would be important for me to know. So I didn't have to learn that the first time I sat down with them, but I could review those documents before I arrived, and so we could jump off quickly into what would be important once I got there.
Yeah. And I'm a firm believer in doing a listening tour. I mean, I was lucky to have a great transition because the outgoing VP was still available to talk through things, and it was just incredibly helpful. But meeting with each of your direct reports and really just listening the first several months, that's really what I've tried to do, is listen to people's concerns, listen to what they consider the culture of the organization to be, and meet with your key stakeholders, individual meetings with other cabinet members, other departments, and getting to understand the institution, really.
I agree with everything that's been said, and I would also add that in my experience, the moment that you have a signed contract executed, you've accepted an offer, you've agreed on those things, and as soon as you have an email account established, work starts. It's on. So even if if you're across the country and you're still not going to start in your job for another 2 months, you're going to be getting emailed, you're going to be asked to weigh in on decisions, all those things. So just recognize that as soon as you accept the job, you're on. Even though you're technically not there, you're on. And so it is challenging trying to wrap up things at one institution, because there are lots of needs there before a leadership change, and start to be dialed in and present with what's going on at your next institution. But that is part of the delicate balancing act. And in a perfect world, we'd be able to, accept a job offer, take 2 months off in between to, get ourselves together, then relocate and get settled. But it just doesn't happen. So you'll be stuck trying to manage 2 jobs and trying to get things in place. And I really agree with what Dusty said of asking people to put together things in writing that you can read about, where they are, be it the annual report, strategic plan, or just a basic briefing document from your direct reports. Listening to people is crucial, so I really agree with what Barb said also. And I think you need to recognize that as a newcomer, everybody's coming to you, and that people will often try to get you to make a decision or agree to something, and you need to just take your time and make sure that you have all the facts and all the background before you make a decision, because you may not know the political landmines, and that by signing off on that one thing that seems so minor could have lots of other implications. So be mindful of all the people who come to you first. Their motives may be just to get what they need before everybody else. So think about that.
So I want to be respectful of your time, and I'm going to use your advice and give you your syllabus. You've got about 30 seconds left, and I want to ask you to each share some resources or recommendations that might help viewers continue their preparation, either for institutional recruiting or for personal searches. And just note that we're tweeting out a link right now to the Spelman and Johnson website that features a great list of resources and books that folks can use to help them prepare for the search process.
I'll just start with that briefly. Before I even was interested in going on the market, I met with Ellen at a conference, and I just said, look, I come from the faculty. I don't know what my trajectory might look like as a vice president at another institution. So just sitting down with a search firm to talk about possibilities or what the landscape is can be incredibly useful. They are truly experts in their field and can provide great guidance.
I would probably say, get that colleague from your doctoral program that is your cheerleader, and talk a little bit about what you're thinking about and get their perspectives from. They're going to be at another institution by then about what you think you ought to be, considering or what might be in the air, and make sure you've got someone that's being able to be that support person for you. And then I would say if there's someone at your current institution. For me, it was another vice president at my last institution that became that person I could go talk to and chat with. That became another. Those two people, somebody inside and outside the school, as you kind of navigate that, to provide those important perspectives, so you have someone to talk to about sort of preparing for those interviews or making sense as to what happens next.
Mm-hmm.
I would add, do your homework. So if it's the institution, be on the website, get to know them, and really understand the position. And then the other thing I would say is look for a sponsor. I think that's very helpful.
Hey, Tony, can I add one last thing? I'm sorry, Ellen. No matter what you do, if you get the job or if you don't get the job, if you don't get the job, send the nicest damn thank you note you've ever sent in your entire life. I'm amazed at people who don't get the job that act shocked and dismayed. And you want to leave that person thinking, you are so professional, I want to recommend you the next time someone calls me and says, you know anyone great? So just make sure you keep it on the positive the whole way out, no matter what happens.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, as a last little closing, get the book Executive Presence by Sylvia Hewlett, because regardless of where you are, it's going to help bridge whether you've got the skills and experience and you can make that next move up to that senior position. It's an excellent book.
Fantastic. Thank you to all of you for such a rich show, so much wisdom from everyone. I hope people will come back to this show. We're actually going to create a transcript of this show so that people can search through it to find what they need. Thanks again also to our program sponsors. Just a quick note, coming up on December 1st, Heather Shea Gasser will be hosting an important and timely episode on supporting Muslim students on campus with Farhan Syed, Maria Ahmed, Hamza Khan, and Ibu Patel, who's a member of the President Obama's inaugural Advisory Council on Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships. I'll be back on December 9th for another timely episode, I think, to talk about current issues in fraternities and sororities with the Executive Director and CEO from the Association of Fraternity and Sorority Advisors, AFA, Mark Kopsel, the AFA Foundation board member Amy Voida, and one of the other executive board members from AFA. You can receive reminders about this and other great shows by subscribing to the Higher Ed Live newsletter. You can also browse the archives at higheredlive.com or subscribe to our iTunes podcast. I am Tony Doody. Thanks so much, everyone, for watching today. I hope you make it a great week, and I look forward to seeing you soon.